We have our first speaker is a gentleman from the Milton Friedman School of Choice. The Friedman Foundation works to educate the public and policymakers about school choice, how it works, and why it's needed. Derrell graciously accepted our invitation to come here this evening. I'd like to welcome Derrell Bradford.
Good afternoon, good evening. I dress like an adult today despite the heat. I want to know, well, you all know I take you very seriously. And I'm delighted to be here. And I'm really happy to talk to you about two things that are very important to me in my personal life and my professional life. And those things are music and school choice. And the reason why they're important is because this was my choice. So in 1986, I was growing up in the worst part of Southwest Baltimore, now made famous by The Wire. Whenever I see guys from The Wire out on the street, I gotta give them a high five. And I really got struck by lightning, and I won the lottery, and I got into school here, which is the St. Paul School for Boys in Brooklynville, Maryland, where I went from grades 7 to 12. I played varsity football and varsity lacrosse, and learned I liked to write, and had really amazing teachers, and had my life filled up and turned into a real person, like a fully realized human being that one day was going to be able to fight over things I care about and things I believe in. And I've been humbled and shocked about the fact that I had that, and people in my family did not have that. Kids on my block did not have that at the corners of Baker and Woodgier Street in Southwest Baltimore. But for me getting this chance, I would not be the person I am today. And I've spent the last 12 years at this point working on public policy that is meant to make sure that kids, no matter who their parents are, where they live, what their zip codes are, or what their parents' income is, have the same kinds of chances that I did. I'm crazy about this. I think it is the most important thing that we can fight for in America, is the right for every kid to get a great education, because nobody calls a kid up when they're about to be born and says, hey, your parents, they're not ready, you might want to come back later. So what does any of this have to do with music? Does anyone remember what this is? Does anybody know what this is? I talked to so many people about this. It's like, no, remember. It's a big age thing on this thing.
What's a record?
This is a record store, precisely. I mean, it could have been HMV, it could have been Tower, it could have been Sam Goody, whatever. But and more precisely, this was the HMV in Times Square in Manhattan. So back in the day, before I started working in education policy, I was an English major. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. I wanted to write, that was my thing. And so I got a job, not writing, and then I finally had a job writing. And so I was running this magazine called City Guide, which is in all the hotels in New York City. And so we launched a sister magazine called 411, which was like a monthly bar, club, and lounge guide, which is the best job in the universe. So we would just go out and show up and get toe up and write about it. It was fabulous. But we had a big music section in the magazine as well, and so we spent a lot of time at HMV. And I really liked HMV. HMV had smart people working there. They had a huge import section. The people were knowledgeable, and you could always get stuff that nobody else would have there. But if HMV didn't have what you wanted, that was a nightmare. So does anybody remember what it was like to try to get a record, which is like the bigger black thing that later turned into a CD, which is like the smaller silver thing? Does anybody remember what it was like to try to get one of those if they didn't have it? Does anybody remember how long that took, or how expensive it was? I remember the first album, it was a tape I actually got on import. There was a big tome you had to open up and actually flip through and find a number, and then order the number, and they send it to whatever. This process was miserable, right? I mean, I'm not trying to bust out HMV. I thought HMV was a phenomenal record store as long as what they had what you wanted. Does anyone know what this is?
Yep. Sean Fan.
I love that. That's awesome. So Napster was like, you're the person that should be least likely to know what all this stuff is. You want to bleed against this whole thing. You're right there. We were drinking together. So Napster unleashes a tidal wave of new music that you'd never heard before. It was like a billion little drops washing over everything creative inside of you. And Napster, to me, like, liberates music in three very important ways that no one who had ever been to the record store before would ever have thought possible. The first thing is what? You could get whatever you wanted. The second thing was when. You could get it whenever you wanted. And the last thing was where. You could get the music wherever you wanted. So I can remember this one time, I was online and I was looking up this band, Bo Casper's Orchestra, which is like sort of a Swedish jazz band, because I was dating a Swedish girl at the time, which is awesome. But either way, like, Napster unleashes like consumer demand about something that is very important to all of us, like the song you heard when you met your wife, the anthem you listened to when you were getting fired up to go play sports or whatever. It unleashes a demand and an interaction with that thing that never could have come into existence with the record store. Now, Napster had a lot of problems, and the number one problem was that Napster was illegal.
Not at first.
Which may be instructive, actually. But either way, what Napster sets free in terms of consumer expectation and demand, that genie can never be put back into the bottle afterwards. Does anyone know what this is?
iTunes.
That's a 60. Transformative policy or product is introduced into the world, and it changes the fundamental interaction with the thing itself forever. So iTunes rationalizes and makes legal the consumer demand and expectation that Napster set free. And I would argue that, other than the fact that it builds on the where to what and where, the thing that iTunes does the best is that it raises the quality of albums, because now you can buy singles. So does anybody remember back in the day, you go and you buy an album and you pay $15.99 for one song and 14 songs that suck and come along for free? So now if I'm actually going to buy an album, like the album's got to be good, the whole thing has to be good, because I have the option of customizing and curating precisely what I have and what I want. And again, this builds on what Napster set free, but it never would have happened if Napster had not happened. Does anyone know what this is?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's half and half. Okay, so
Online streaming.
this is like iTunes on steroids, basically. So Spotify is like an online library of almost all the music in the universe. And maybe the most interesting thing about it is that it is highly curated. So if I'm watching a television show, like let's say I'm watching The Following. The Following is a great example. The Following has like a great moody set of songs that are its soundtrack, and I wanted to know what they all were. So I searched for The Following. And guess what? Someone had put them all in a playlist for me already. So there's an amazing sort of interactive finding and sharing thing going on with Spotify. But maybe the most important thing about Spotify is that it unleashes music along the fourth axis, digital music along the fourth axis, which is how much. How much used to be the space you actually put the CDs in. Then it was the size of the hard drive you actually stored the music on. And now it's how many minutes do you have, right? Now it's your cell phone or your internet service provider, because you stream the whole thing online. Either way though, Spotify, which I love deeply, does not come into existence without iTunes, and absolutely does not come into existence without Napster. So what does this have to do with education? If music is education, most people are getting their education at the record store. Which is great if you live close to it. It's great if they have what you want. It's awesome if you can buy the CDs, you can afford the CDs. But if those three planks are not met, you have a real problem. You as a family has a problem. You as a child has a problem. And I want to stick with this. This is interesting. Like, I would argue that people consume school like a product in the same way they consume music, and that there's a very high level of buying and selling that takes place, and that the people who know that the most are the people who get the most out of it. So you could argue that like the record store works fine if you're rich, right? And the CDs are essentially your mortgage. If you can afford to buy the best school through the housing market, more power to you. I wish I was you. If you're a working class family, this is significantly more difficult for me because it's a price and a choice conversation. So as a person who's lived in cities a lot, I feel like one of the reasons why cities suffer is because we can't keep what I call dinks and sinks. Dual income, no kid, single income, no kid, right? These are young families that eventually want to have children. And what is the first conversation everybody has when their child is 4 years old? You're living in a hipster neighborhood, you're in a village, you're like, we can't stay here anymore, right? We gotta bid ourselves up into some Tony suburb someplace where everybody is like competing over an overheated apartment for school that is supposed to be free. And then the third group of people who I think are getting screwed the most here are folks who don't have the capital to actually play in the housing market. So in New Jersey, which is my adopted state where I worked for a very long time, and lots of other states now, we hire off-duty police officers to follow kids home and make sure that they are going to homes that are in the actual districts, district of residence for the schools. Right? And this has happened precisely because whenever you take anything that people want and you make it scarce, there is a black market that develops for it, right? It's like economics 101. So in Ohio and in Connecticut and in California, we're now arresting parents for doing just this. Now, so I know nobody in here has done it, but does anyone in here know someone who has lied about their address to get a kid into a better school?
Yes.
I won't tell anybody that you. So I'm in rooms where literally everybody raises their hands. I'm in rooms of teachers. I gave this speech to a room with 200 teachers and 80% of them raised their hands. This is not the America that we set up. This is not the promise of free school that is supposed to make you an equal, that is supposed to give you a fair shot at pursuing what the experiment is about the American dream. And I just want to add this one other part of this, because this frustrates me, particularly because New York and New Jersey are such high-spending states in terms of their public education systems, and in terms of their real estate taxes as a result. And in a place like Newark, where they spend $24,500 a kid, or Asbury Park, where it's like $33,000 a kid. I mean, the averages in New York, New Jersey are very similar, but some of the urban outliers are extraordinary. I'm just highlighting this because we've organized a system that, from an economic standpoint, is delivering lots of people and lots of young people into two big debt bubbles. One is the college debt bubble, and even though I have no data to back this up, I'm going to assert it with authority. I think one of the reasons why the college continues to be more expensive is because a BA is the new high school diploma. So we're actively losing faith in our K-12 system ability, in our K-12 system's ability to generate people who have high school skills. And so a college diploma becomes more important. It now costs more money. So I think that's on the one side. And the other side is the stuff we talked about earlier. Everybody knows that the housing market and the school market are married. There are lots of people who have been good actors and bought into that and pay their dues, and I don't exactly know what to do about them. I do know that I have a real problem with the fact that we continue to deliver lots of younger people and lots of just people, period, into a housing market that is blown and that ultimately mortgages their future economic prosperity because they're trying to buy a school that is free. I think these two things are huge disincentives both on the prosperity of the country and on people and innovation and their right to choose where they want to live as well. But it doesn't have to be this way. Because just like Napster let the genie out of the bottle, choice in education is like the disruptive power that gives us the new, that helps us compete and equip our students and bring more excellence, more greatness into the world. And there are lots of places I would talk about lots of different things here, but like I'm on the board of Success Academy in the city. I'm blessed to be on the board there. Success Academy did not exist 9 years ago. Now we have 9,000 low-income kids in the city who are knocking it out of the park. The first class of 8th graders from Success Academy just went to high school this year. And I had lunch with those kids at their graduation ceremony. These kids, their parents took a flyer. They didn't know. 8 years ago, they had no idea what was going to happen here. And here they all were. They were me. It was amazing and fulfilling, and I felt blessed to be able to sit in front of those kids and know that that thing had worked. We can do this, and we can do better. But we can't do better, and we can't do this, and more of this, unless you and every other person in this room wants a world that looks this way, thinks a world that is like this is possible, loves the idea of a world where you end is up to you, but where you start is a fair place because of us. This is the dream of the 21st century debate. And it is real right now and today. Right now and today. So thank you very much for having me. I will do, sorry, you can clap if you want to, I wouldn't clap. I'm really delighted to be here. If anybody has any Q&A, I got like 10 minutes to do Q&A. You are a ringer, so you get to ask the first question, so please go.
All right, it's actually not my question. My son, who's at MIT and is into music, computers, and education. So I showed him your TED Talk, and I asked him if he had any questions for you, and he said, he makes a very interesting analogy. So I guess it might be worth asking him where he thinks the limit to online education is. Does he believe that something like edX can actually replace schools, or will they forever be a supplement, and will we need to rely on brick and mortar schools? And of course, where do you draw those conclusions from? There's more, but I'll stop.
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. Interesting. There's an interesting piece in this talk that talks about edX. So the guy who created edX was a professor of artificial intelligence at Stanford. And so he had 200 kids in his class. He wanted more people to be able to take the class. So he put it online, and 106,000 people took it. So obviously I was not one of them. I'm not an artificial intelligence geek. But the most important thing about that exercise is that at the end, when they gave the final and they got the results back, the top 400 scores were from people who did not take the class at Stanford. The 401st person was actually enrolled in the class at Stanford, right? So it's hugely instructive in terms of the thirst for education at very high levels that is out there, but access is the barrier. So I just want to highlight this. So the answer, though, is right now there totally are limits to these things. I feel like on some of the humanities, we really have not figured out how to do that well in a structured online way, right? Like maybe the human interactions is more important in some of the arts than in some of the sciences. What I would say, though, is that we can't not do this. Like any continuum of things, right? You shop one place because you want to get one thing. You shop at another place because you want to get another thing. Unless they're directly competing with each other, they normally won't put each other out of business, but they supplement one another along the continuum. So I totally think there's still a place, and will continue to be a place, for brick and mortar, largely because, like, going to school is a ritual that we've all been raised on, right? And it's like a reflex. There's a building, you go to it. There's a person there at the front, that person is your teacher. It's really powerful. And I just want to say this kind of off to the side about this. It is so powerful that it is almost impossible for people to imagine that it can be different, because so many people experienced it in a very specific way, right? You never imagined NASA until it appeared. Right? It was no way anybody could have imagined that thing would be real, as long as the record store was the only thing that had to go on. So that is hopefully an artful dodge of that question. Yes, sir. You had a question.
I just can't. What I can't imagine when you propose here is hundreds of thousands of teachers out of work. That's what I can't imagine. To create this, to its greatest fulfillment. I can't imagine that.
So I actually think it's completely the opposite. Right now we have 3.4 million teachers in the NEA who have to teach in a district monopoly because it's the #1 offerer of teaching positions. And every time we create a new educational option for a kid, we also create a new employment opportunity for an adult, right? So it's difficult, like, very few people have these discussions about the fact that the pie can and does get bigger on both sides of this. I want to make a really important point, though. I think you're partly responding to what he's talking about, too. So I do think that online, as a slice of this, because this talk isn't about online education. It's actually about paradigms in education. It could be about teacher evaluation, it could be about charter schools, it could be about open enrollment, or it could be about vocational schools. It's really just about the way we deliver it versus the way we could be delivering. So that's a really important thing. I do think there is a role for amplifying the voice of truly excellent people who teach with online tools. Maybe that's online lectures, maybe it's MOOCs. I think there are a variety of ways that we can give kids, so it's a massive online course offering, a MOOC. Sorry, MOOC shorthand. I think that 100,000 kids should be able to get a lecture from the teacher of the year in every state in one subject or another, right? That kind of amplification, I think, is like super important. On the other side of this, I think that, so I don't have to think this. So the Thomas Fordham Institute did a study that said, that surveyed parents and said, would you rather have a smaller class size with a randomly assigned teacher, or a slightly larger one with a truly excellent teacher? And 3 to 1, people were like, I would rather have the latter. So I don't think we're building a world where hundreds of thousands of people are out of work. I think we are building a world where you live isn't predictive of whether or not you get an inexperienced, low-paid, poorly supported teacher, which is essentially the current system, and where there are tons more opportunities for teachers to be free and creative and teach in environments that work best for them.
But you just hit the nail on the head. You got hundreds of thousands of. You can have 500 kids in a class. My wife's a teacher.
Sure.
You can have 500 kids in a classroom versus, say, 35. You can eliminate right there, what, 16, 17 positions? Right there.
So
put 500 in a classroom, an online classroom.
So I will add this, and I want to, if nobody else has a question, we'll keep talking about it. The people who think what I think and who do what I do don't pursue this as an exercise in scale. I had an amazing teacher when I was in the 4th grade. Her name was Miss McCullough. And Miss McCullough came up to me one day and she said, Derrell, I want you to be in this contest. And I never would have done it. She saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And because I won that contest, I got into St. Paul's, right? So this is like huge. I had not realized how important she was to me until we had this conversation. So there was an exercise I did in January, and I was looking back on this. So teaching, and specifically being amazing at it, right, is so hard that not everyone can do it. And so like the pursuit of any of this stuff about like unbundling where somebody lives with where they go to school, or teacher eval, or any of these other things we can talk about in more depth that are less choice related but they grow out of it, is really about knowing that it's so hard to do that A, not everybody should be doing it, and that's fine. That's totally fine. I don't say this in a negative way, like the people who shouldn't be doing it. It's like any other human endeavor. Some people are great at it, some people aren't. And on the other side, figuring out the best ways to recruit, reward, and retain the people who actually are really good at it. And if it's pay or job conditions, all these other things, we want to make those things possible. What's really important about this is that none of the stuff that I'm talking about right now has come into existence in the current system. The current system's incentives aren't aligned to create those environments for folks. Yes?
On the fundamental rule of economics, competition does 2 things: improves quality, lowers costs.
Yep.
And what you're dealing with is an unresponsive bureaucracy. I know this implicates through private schools all the way through.
So before I move on to the next question, I want to say this thing. It's a policy idea of mine that I've been kicking around. And a good friend of mine, so I'm hugely supportive of charter schools, I'm hugely supportive of vouchers and tax credits, whatever. A good friend of mine is leading the, it's called Invest in Ed. He's leading that effort here, which I'm also hugely supportive of. But my thing is like, what if you could take your college savings account and make it so that you could spend out of it at any time? So it's almost like a tax advantage way to save and spend on school. Maybe it's not as high impact as a voucher, but it provides some purchasing power around things that lots of people are spending their own money on to enrich their kids' education, including enrichment. I think enrichment is really a really important angle on this. Minnesota has 2 bills that emulate what I just described. Arizona has what's called an education savings account, which I really think is like school choice 3.0. You can never pass what they pass in Arizona in this region of the country. They basically say, if you don't send your kid to the local school, we'll give you a bunch of money and a debit card and a bunch of approved providers, and you can customize the education that your kid gets. Yeah, and I'm aware that it will not happen here. But I think the fundamentals of it are worth thinking about in this region of the country.
I was just going to say, addressing that gentleman, 2 of my grandchildren are homeschooled, and they've been doing it for 5 years. And when that started, it was my daughter teaching these kids. Now they do online classes, so obviously somebody else is working. They have these schools that the kids attend once a week, where there are teachers there to make sure that they're learning what they're learning and any questions. So in 5 years, I know that those kids have gone from just their mother to probably 10 other or 15 other people that are now working.
Sure. So you're making 2 incredibly important points. One of them is about what we call blended learning now, right? And some of my friends think blended is like a disruptive strategy, and some of them think it's actually an approach to teaching. But and the Clayton Christensen Institute, Clayton Christensen wrote this book called Disrupting Class, which is about innovating at the edge. It's about disruptive innovation. It's about like going at Sony with the iPod instead of a better Discman, that kind of thing. So it's really instructive. But there are 4 kinds of schools that emulate what you're talking about, 4 blended models, and some of them have kids in school all the time with lots of individually focused stuff that's online. Some of them have kids in school like once a week, and they're doing lots of self-directed stuff, and a lot of it is online. I think the most important thing about this, and your 5-year window is interesting, is that 10 years ago, nobody would have imagined this. Right? Like, this is what's best about freedom, right? Is that it allows us to create things and bring things into the universe that normally monopolies do not. Like monopolies aren't about innovation. Like, this is the deal. I tell this to you like you never heard it before. But what's sort of in line with this, like, I don't know what the 21st century's education system should look like. It might not be a system. It might be a bunch of individual autonomous schools for all I know. It might be tons of small, networks. I feel like my sort of gift is that I know I don't know. I'm not trying to shape what it is based on what my old vision of school was, right? Like, I want to let the new thing come into existence and see what happens. The kinds of experiences that your children are having that your grandchildren are having were not readily available 5 years ago, and they are now. And that's an important change, and we can do more in that. Yes?
So Derrell, functionally now, right, if you send your kids to school, you pay your taxes, but then you don't want them to go to that specific school, right? And you want them to go to one of these, you have to pay out of pocket. So you're basically paying for school twice, right?
Yes.
Operationally, what is your ideal situation? Like, because if you pay your taxes, then if you don't want to go there, you get a tax credit for that same amount back, and you can use it for one of these educational.
Yeah, so I just think the definition of public education should be like what you pick, not who pays for it. Like most people are like, when we talk about public education, it's funded by taxpayers, it's free at the point of delivery, and it's managed locally, and it's tied to residents, right? So like, those are maybe the big features of it. And I think that, and this may shock you, that not every school is right for every kid. This is usually for some people, but not every school is right for every child, right? And that I also believe that the traditional district system isn't going to go away. I do think that we need an approach that is vastly more customizable, and it helps people afford the right choices for their kids. And so one of the sort of last proposals I was working on, and I would support the same kind of thing here, is like a tax credit on a sliding scale that would help individual families pay for and afford these things. If you're homeschooling, right? Like, you're buying books, you're doing public service, you're paying your taxes, you're educating your kid. Like, why wouldn't we want to support that? If you're a low-income family and maybe you're in a decent school, like, why wouldn't we want to support you being able to buy tutoring or enrichment, which are accelerants to the achievement gap, right? And I mean, you could argue that rich parents not only have the money to do these things, they know precisely what to buy, right? And because they buy those things, they trickle down on everything else, which I have no news to everybody here too, but when rich people marry each other, there are fewer of them to marry. So you're supposed to live with that. The sort of cultural bonuses, the personal networks, the school networks, and the financial benefits of having people like that get together, like they not only amplify themselves for kids, they're sort of like asset for other kids. So that I would love to see a broad set of policies that basically gave, based on income, lots of folks different levels of ability to buy the kinds of school or schooling that they want. So that it's not just a function of, can you get the best mortgage, can you lie by your address, can you move into the smallest apartment in the most expensive place in Nassau so that you can get free school. Yes.
Okay, so what you're describing is the antithesis of Common Core, in the sense, not the standards so
Yep.
much, but the concept that every child will learn on Tuesday, will be, at 11 o'clock, will be learning exactly this from that textbook at the exact same time, all across the country.
So my response will be more nuanced here. So this is an interesting thing for me. So like I've done a lot of stuff on teacher evaluation, principal evaluation, and tenure reform. Lots of stuff on choice and charter schools and tax credits and these things, and some stuff on district governance. But like Common Core specifically, I have not worked on. Here's what I want to say about it though. There is a problem around standardization in America that has to be dealt with, right? And I think it has to be dealt with proactively. So in Millburn, Millburn, New Jersey, a kid is taking Algebra 2 right now, just like a kid in Westchester is taking Algebra 2. And it is actually Algebra 2, right? A kid in Harlem is taking Algebra 2, and it isn't, right? So regardless of what the actual, the lesson is, there is a role for actually knowing that the content is the same. Now, whether or not it's this content, whether or not it's this specific set of standards, I think that's a separate conversation. And I know lots of people who have problems with the standards. Some people think they're great, some people think they're terrible, right? And George Will did write a hugely compelling op-ed about the federal government's inability to implement anything at one point, which was, like all of my friends, my Democratic friends, Republican friends, are just kind of like, yeah, man, you make a real good case there. But I do think that in every other endeavor, right, standardization has empowered our society and let it be more creative, not less. So $1 is always 100 pennies. A rail track is always the same width. A football field is always 100 yards.
Right.
Unless you're in Canada.
But one of the one of the downsides is one of the guys I had met was one of the original creators and proponents of the whole Common Core standard, whatever, as hardcore liberal as you could possibly get. But his point was that standards have a huge place, and that's what they were for. The problem was, especially here on Long Island, that there are many poorly performing schools.
Right.
And these standards were there as a minimum standard for those schools, not so much to be a straitjacket for the good performing schools who didn't need this.
Yeah, so this is the last thing that I will say. So the Long Island thing is, every place this is like outliers, right? And Long Island is an outlier big enough to be like a state, essentially. You could secede if you wanted to. Here's what I think super valuable and instructive about what you just said, and it informs my discussion about this, all the time. To me, the opposite of highly standardized is choice. And so a good friend of mine used to run New Schools New Orleans, which is an all charter district in New Orleans, and is making an enormous project, is totally choice driven, was arguing that maybe teacher evaluation, as complicated as it is, isn't worth it. And maybe it would be better instead just to let people pick individual schools that were trying to figure it out on their own, right? And so to me, the goal state isn't to standardize the system that 50 million people go to. But the fact that 50 million people go to it means that it has to standardize itself, because that's the only way that it can hold itself accountable. So, smaller, more focused, less standardized, better, I would say. In the absence of that, which is not what we have right now, like, we do have to find some way to know that there is a unified floor, even if we don't want people sitting on it. And I think the Common Core is the latest iteration of that. The intent is certainly there. Like I said, it's much more nuanced than what I read a lot of the time. But in my experience, particularly in New Jersey, it's like, I want kids who are taking the same class to get the same thing. And knowing that they don't get the same thing and that that's working precisely as intended is a big problem, I think.
As a floor, not a ceiling.
That's right. That's right. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.